more video streaming interface discussions, and Pegasus. This is MacVoices. This edition of MacVoices is supported by the MacVoices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter to keep you up on all the latest from MacVoices. Watch or listen to MacVoices straight from your email client. Sign up at macvoices.com/newsletter and stay up to date. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. This is part 2 in a conversation with the MacVoices Live panel where we covered a bunch of different subjects. In part 1, we started a conversation about streaming video interfaces and some frustrations that I had with them and others have had with them. And that conversation continues here before we start to dig into the Pegasus spyware story and determine whether or not you need to worry about it. So let's go back and let the panel do the talking.
You know, the cable box I have, it annoys me because it won't remember where I am in a DVR program. So if I stop and then come back, next week, it's like, you have to kind of watch things through, because otherwise you just got to try to remember where you were and fast forward through it. It's like, honestly, you can't keep like 64 bits of metadata about where the last played, how can that possibly be? And I've seen that, I'm a bicycle racing fan, and there's a number of online players for, there's different, channels that, and that's a complaint in almost all of them. That none of them remember where you're at, which is really bad. You've got like a 6-hour bicycle race. And if you stop watching it, and then like come back an hour later, so I've always got to remember, okay, well, I stopped watching it. It's 87 kilometers to go. So then you got to scrub back and figure out where you're at. The Tour de France now was on Peacock, which I believe also had the Open. And so they just started. Peacock's new. In the past, it was on NBC Sports Gold. They got rid of that, and now they have Peacock. And I'll have to say, NBC Sports Gold would never remember the position. Peacock, it does remember the position. So I can stop watching the race and go back later. And it doesn't remember I was watching that race. I still have to go back through the hub and, go back and I'm trying to watch stage 14, please. But then when I start it, in fact, I was amazed. It would go back and forth. I could go between my iPad and my Apple TV, and it would say, oh, do you want the Apple TV to go to the place where you were on the iPad? And it actually worked. But a lot of these others, they don't do that. I have the same problem with, Acorn, I guess it remembers it. But, and also, I wish Apple, somehow all these streaming players, they all seem to implement their own player somehow. So like things like some of them, the pause button's in the middle, and some of it's down on the left, and some of them you can tap big areas on the video to skip forward and back. Some of them it's a little thing in the middle. It's like, why isn't all the same? Why hasn't Apple provided an interface? Although actually, Netflix and Amazon have a better interface than Apple does. But it seems like that should be something, an API that Apple provides, that everybody, why do I have to, every player I look at, it has a different, the closed captions in a different place, the pauses in a different place. What?
Yeah. But you made a really interesting point though earlier, and that is the best coders don't work. I'm kind of like Frank. I would like to think that we're far enough along that there would be some good basic design education that goes on for coders and for folks that do some of these things. And instead, it just seems like the wild, wild west where nothing is consistent. And
look at TikTok.
Well, it's not just coders. It's everybody in the, it's the user interface people. It's the, people who design the back ends for the billing. It's all through the whole company. These are companies of mediocre people that, nobody is a kid and says, oh, I want to grow up and work for Comcast.
I don't think
know,
Andy Warhol thought it was gonna be this
there are
bad.
people that feel that way about Apple and like, oh, it's my dream to, or Google. People are like, yeah, so they get the best, they get the cream of the crop, and uh, these other companies are not going to, they're not going to get that.
Andrew, you're awfully quiet. I know that your big story is coming up, but do you have any thoughts on this? I mean, what do you use for your video entertainment? I'm hesitant to say broadcast TV or anything else.
Yeah, I've been quiet just because I don't actually have a TV or one of these streaming boxes. I mean, if I want to watch a TV show or a movie, I'm just on my MacBook or my iPad watching Netflix, Apple TV, etc.
Wow. Now that may be a serious, no kidding here. That may be a generational difference right there. Here's somebody that doesn't have a TV. So that's really interesting.
Well, I have a TV, but we watch I when you started this, I wanted to jokingly say, what is this broadcast TV you're speaking of? And I definitely don't almost never watch anything live. If I want to watch something, I'll DVR it and watch it later. So, yeah.
Jim, I mean, that particular live sporting events and a few others over the year are the main things. That and local news.
Yeah, but
really,
local news is I definitely don't want to watch local news.
Yeah.
And sporting events, I record those. Who the hell wants to watch all those commercials? And so, you have to be a little careful not to get it spoiled. But what the heck do I want to sit and watch it in that moment? And yeah, interestingly, like the Tour de France, I didn't watch any of it on television this year. I watched it mostly on my iPad, a little bit on the Apple TV, but all streaming. And it is on, NBCSN, but I didn't DVR it.
That's interesting. I'm like in Chuck's camp. For some reason, if it's happening at that moment, I want to see it now. I don't want someone to pick for me what moments I watch.
Well, of course,
I want to see it unfold.
Well, the Tour de France, it starts at 3:30 in the morning, my time.
Yes.
So that's a problem. But actually for that, for example, so now, like if you do watch it on TV, whether it's live or whatever, there's commercials in it and they break the action for the commercials. And now actually this year was the first year on the streaming feed, they covered the entirety of every single stage, and the international feed has no commercials. I don't know how the announcer does it. Because it's like 7 hours, and I noticed like now this year they covered it like it used to be. They would only cover the last 2 hours of the races, and now they have the whole thing from the very beginning, and till the last racer comes in, which some cases is 40 minutes later, and they never did that before. Wow. I've never seen that on any race. So. And obviously there's a lot of material. So for a lot of it, I just have my iPad sitting next to my computer and it's just kind of going. And, I listen to the tone of voice of the announcer and like, oh, I better pay attention or back it up. I mean, there's hours of they're just going along and nothing happens. And at the end of the race, it gets exciting. Depends on the kind of stage.
Paul in the chat room says, I like watching TV on my iPad better than my TV.
I do too.
Yeah. Something to be said for that. Brittany, I know you mentioned Roku. I mean, you're a little closer to Andrew's demographic, or he's closer to yours. Do you own a TV?
Yeah. The one that used to be in my room, I made space for a movie studio, but we have a whole surround sound set up downstairs. It had an Apple TV, still does, but going in, but everything's run through the amplifier, and that's the guy that decides what you're watching, so that the audio can go out everywhere. But it's interesting because we got a royal fancy smart TV, and so I very often just AirPlay to that. even though we have the Apple TV sitting there, it's also a very old Apple TV. And so we're either running stuff through the amplifier or airplaying it straight to the TV box from another device.
Okay. So you still use it as a TV, but you feed it a little bit differently.
Yeah. It's either getting an amplifier signal, which is going to be from a computer, or if we're watching stuff on this old drive we have filled with movies that I must have fallen off a truck somewhere that my uncle gave us. I honestly don't even really know how that happened. But sometimes we're watching riff tracks. We want to watch, we want to find some old, like we just watched Face Off. And we're like, wow, we sure don't want to pay for Face Off anywhere to watch riff tracks. And it was on the drive. But anyway, so it's coming off a computer or off a DVD player or something, goes to the amplifier, or we'll airplay straight to the TV. And the nice thing about airplaying directly to the TV is it'll take control automatically. And if my Android friend wants to broadcast something, he can do it too. He'll just use the other signal dealie.
Okay, interesting. All right. Well, we beat this topic to death. Chat room, I'd love to hear from you, and folks out there, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on the streaming interface.
We do actually have an interesting broadcast. I don't watch broadcast TV, but my dad watches things like The Open, usually on DVR, because there's a lot of commercial breaks. But we don't do the Comcast cable anymore, although we don't have an option for internet. But he uses the signal from their businesses in Bandon, which is a different cable company, and he'll just broadcast it too and watch the DVR long distance onto his on his iPad or broadcast it to the bigger TV.
Yeah. So folks out there, I'd love to know what you're doing. I mean, there've been plenty of shows, and we've done shows on cord cutting, and it's absolutely desirable, but there are still some gotchas. There's still some rough spots, and we've talked about some of them, but there are also some rough spots with remaining with a service like Comcast. And I'd love to know what your experiences have been. So drop me an email, Chuck@MacVoices. I'd love to know. All right, Andrew, this is the moment you've been waiting for.
Right.
Tell us about Pegasus and whether we should be concerned.
Explain.
So this is some news that has been, I think it dropped over the weekend. There's still so many articles coming out about it. Now, I was looking it up. I know at least NSO Group has been written about since at least 2018, maybe earlier. So it's not really a new name, but Amnesty International and I think some other nonprofit came up with this investigation about their Pegasus malware, where this is a Israeli, NSO Group is an Israeli-based firm, and they are selling their malware to governments for the purposes of surveillance. The article, one of the first articles that came out, I think, was from the Washington Post. They found, I think, 37 phones infected with this malware belonging to journalists, human rights activists, maybe a couple presidents, I think. Basically, any person whom these governments might view as, some kind of dissident enemy of the state, right? I think one of the reasons people are concerned about this is because this is what is known as zero-click malware. So you can be infected by this without having to do anything. You don't have to click on a URL in a phishing email or visit a sketchy website. Wow. It sounds like someone can send you some kind of malicious link or file or whatever through texting, maybe like iMessage, and boom, you're automatically infected. And all the data that you have are now being collected and surveilled by these groups. My opinion is that most people probably don't have to worry about this, just because, like I said, you kind of have to be like in a target of probably a government. There is a tool that I've seen that Amnesty International has shared on GitHub. I forget what it's called, Mobile Verification Toolkit, I think, where you can try to do this thing, run this thing on your computer and try to see if Pegasus has been ever on your smartphone or not. So also one more thing, to me, it kind of seems like the news has been focused on iPhones. Both iPhones and Androids have also been affected. There was, I'm trying to remember, there was something about iPhones where maybe it was just maybe easier to detect the infection afterwards, but it's not just targeting Apple devices. This is both iPhones and Androids.
Across the board.
Yeah, there was an article. The Macalope wrote an interesting article on Macworld.com, sort of calling out the Washington Post for focusing so much on iPhones. And the reason was that the iPhone logs give you a lot more information to diagnose the problem. The Android logs were sorely missing this information, so you had a harder time.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah, and I thought, it was really interesting. It's like, okay, there's a piece of bias that you wouldn't have thought about, but iPhone has made it. Yes, they're susceptible, apparently to a similar degree as the Android phones, but the iPhones, because of their logging, makes it easier to figure out that you've been infected and how to deal with it. So that's I think a key point, because you're going to see a lot of stuff out there about iPhones, and the fact is that it's Androids too.
Yeah, and that's actually a good thing, right? Like I think Apple has some pretty good built-in tools kind of like that. They do keep logs. There are settings that you can turn on and say, hey, do you want to collect analytics for Apple, iPhone analytics, iCloud analytics? And then there's an option where Apple can share those logs to third-party developers. So just that by itself, it like you were saying, it does kind of sound like Apple has kind of been targeting, but it's just because Apple devices can give some of that detailed information.
Right. And I think it's a fair statement to say that Apple has made the point of their phones being a lot more secure. But this just shows that anything can be hacked. Andrew's been writing a number of articles for the Mac Observer, but one of the first ones I think he wrote was one of my favorite titles of all time. So what's up with this NSO group Pegasus thing anyway? that was great, because it starts off some of the coverage and what is going on. Andrew, do you have any sense, though? I mean, should any of us be worried about it, since we're not dissidents or journalists attacking the powers that be or anything?
Yeah, I guess that just goes back to what I was saying before. In my opinion, most of us probably don't have anything to worry about. This is targeted surveillance versus mass surveillance, like someone, scraping data in the cloud or whatever. So, yeah.
Isn't it sort of up to the person, though, that there may be one person that thinks you're a threat? Now, we may not see them as a threat, but for some reason it got in their head. I'm thinking back to the days of 70s when Herbert Hoover actually opened up a log on John Lennon because they thought he was going to just completely throw out their little game.
Yeah, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, you don't really know, I guess.
It's like, who do you rub the wrong way?
Yeah.
Well, the other thing too is it looked like the primary customers for NSO for buying Pegasus were some of the pretty high powered organizations, and so this is not something that I decide that I want to spy on Brittany, so I go and get Pegasus. This is like, okay, well, that's not a good example, but I want to spy on the CNN anchors, so I'm going to go get Pegasus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's most of the concern about this is that as I haven't seen a full list, but it does sound like most of these customers of this company is governments.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, there are articles all over the place as we record this today about, this is a way you can check to see if you have Pegasus on your iPhone, I'm sure there are Android articles out there the same way. And it's like, yeah, okay, if you want to run them. But it also brings into question just a little bit in my mind that, okay, I'm going to go over here because, somebody's telling me that they can detect Pegasus on my phone. What am I installing on my phone that, that might be a little more at my level?
I think that actually doesn't run on the phone. It looks at your backup on your Mac. That's how it works. It doesn't install on the phone.
Oh, okay. So I'm checking my Mac to see if there's.
So you're installing something potentially malicious on your Mac. No worries.
Yeah, well, that makes me feel better. Thanks for that, Jim. I can go to sleep now and watch my Fire TV restart itself again,
or have it watch you.
And Andrew, the other thing I ask you to maybe touch on tonight too, if we're done with Pegasus, and if we're not, please anybody feel free to dive in. Was the DuckDuckGo email story of the day, which I thought was very interesting.
Yes. Let me see. I have an article up here. What was the name of it? So DuckDuckGo announced this thing today called an email. I think it's just called an email protection service. So what it is it's an email alias service. So you can register a @duck email address with them. And it does sound like you can create other randomized aliases with them. It's very similar to a feature we're going to see in iOS 15, which is called Hide My Email. And essentially all it does is it scans your emails for things like trackers, and then it cleans those out and forwards those emails to your regular inbox, whatever email you choose to sign up with that. And it sounds like it's free, and you can use that with a DuckDuckGo extension and the DuckDuckGo app on your mobile devices.
Okay.
In Gmail, you can just add a plus to the email address and make up a new email address on the fly.
I know you can do that. That's good for maybe signing up for like a newsletter or whatever, but I don't know if that clears out the trackers or not. That the trackers seems to be like their main focus.
So
I think that's not what Apple's thing does.
Yeah. There's I forget what it's called, mail privacy protection. It hides your email address, and it also like blocks the trackers that some of these companies use.
The thing that I have mixed feelings about this, because I use DuckDuckGo, not necessarily consistently, but I do use it. I think the company has a good reputation. They are really obviously making their bones in an even bigger way in privacy and security. And then they're giving me a free service. And of course, we all know what the rules about free services are, that you're the customer. So I'm looking at this and saying, okay, this is great. And if they're going to give anyone who wants it a Duck email address, that too is nice. And as from what I heard on one of the podcasts today, it's removing the trackers in RAM. So it never even writes it to a disk, which is great. That means that, it's not going to have a lot of servers that it has to store stuff on. But, I almost wish they'd said for $5 a year, you could have this email address. It would just make me feel a little bit better than saying, it's going to be free. And so, although, am I paranoid?
Well, DuckDuckGo is free in the first place, right? So why aren't you worried about the DuckDuckGo search engine?
Yeah.
Don't they? Am I making this up? Doesn't DuckDuckGo have they have ads, but they just don't track you. They show you ads, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, obviously they're making money somehow, but I don't know. Maybe they're going to show ads in your email. Where have we heard of that before?
Well,
duck@duck.com.
Actually,
I don't know.
I use Gmail and I don't remember ever seeing any ads. Where are the ads?
I use a third party right now. If as long as it'll hold out, I use a third party interface to it. So,
well, I use MailPlane, so that I'm seeing the web interface, but I don't remember ever seeing. Let's see, is there?
I used to see them over on the right hand side. I've gotten so good at ignoring ads that I can't say that I really remember.
Yeah,
them.
I know. That's what I'm thinking too. I don't remember seeing any for a long time. And I use the Gmail iOS interface app too, and I don't remember seeing ads. I think they're sucking enough data out of me that they don't have to also show me ads.
That's possible.
That's probably what it is.
Webb in the chat room brought up an interesting thing to circle back to Jim's comment about the Pegasus diagnosis software on the Mac. He asks, does this make the case against an iOS backdoor? Which I assume is what you were talking about, Webb, with that question. But yeah, so now we can run iOS apps on our Mac in Big Sur. Does this present a problem for something like Pegasus? Maybe not Pegasus itself.
Well, I'm not sure what the apps have to do with it. And, there's certainly vulnerabilities on Macs as well. A. B, the information about Pegasus seems to be evolving pretty, like there's a lot of different information. Like I just read an article in Cult of Mac while we were having the discussion that claimed that it could infect directly from a cell tower that, Andrew was saying send a text message, but that article made it sound like that wasn't even necessary. Just, and that's another thing. Like people, people never talk about like the cell phone companies, like know where you are all the time. They can man in the middle you a lot. And somehow that just gets completely like, Google, which, yeah, but what about Verizon? And they have done awful things in the past, and it never seems to get any traction or publicity or, it's just like, oh yeah, well, you got to have a cell phone. You got to use a cell phone company. So we'll just ignore that.
Yeah.
And they're so embedded with the, governments and legislatures and, they just sort of get a pass and skate.
So if I understand the question, this person is asking if iPhone backups can be scanned in this way, does that mean there could be a backdoor? Is that correct?
That's the way I'm reading it, and Webb just confirmed yes. The thinking is that if something could run on iOS, then because of the capabilities now of running iOS apps on Big Sur, does this create a backdoor to the Mac operating system to install something you don't want installed? And Webb, again, correct me if I'm wrong.
That doesn't have it.
I'd say probably no. So I just want to share a quote. This is from TechCrunch, I think. So it says, this toolkit lets you take an entire iPhone backup or a full system dump if you jailbreak your phone and feed it for any indicators of compromise known to be used by NSO to deliver Pegasus. I don't think this creates a backdoor because we already have tools that can take a system dump of an iPhone like this for forensic purposes. I reviewed one from Alchemsoft, and there are also other tools like Graykey and Celebrate, for example. So I guess my point is they don't really need a backup to be able to search and break down your phone like that.
But we do if we want to break down our own phone. I think, in order for this to work, you'd have to do the backup unencrypted, because you can do. I think you have a choice when you back up whether you encrypt the backup or not.
Yeah.
And I believe if you encrypted the backup, then this probably isn't going to work.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, fair point. Hey, I want to welcome a late arriving but very welcome Jeff Gamet. Welcome. Good to see you, Jeff.
It's so great to see everyone. And sorry I'm running late, but here I am.
It happens.
You're in demand.
Spans.
Yeah, you're in demand. You're in demand. We've been talking about, you missed the whole beating on the streaming interface thing, but right now we're digging a little bit into Pegasus, and Andrew's enlightening us. And I did want to follow up on something, Jim, I think you were commenting, but I just did a couple searches on DuckDuckGo, and yes, it's showing me ads. Now it's not obnoxious, and according to them, they're not tracking me. And honestly, some of the ads that I'm being shown, like I would have no idea why I'd be being shown ads for pasta. So that doesn't appear to be based on anything.
Time.
Maybe so, Jeff, but there's nothing here that, and I got one from Lowe's from manufactured stone veneer, which is definitely not something I'm in the market for. So figure that out.
Let us know if you get an ad for something you bought 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the indicator. So, and again, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, to your point, they have to make money somehow. But the question sort of became, with this email thing, it sounds like a good idea. I'm just not sure. So, Jeff, any thoughts on? I don't know how much you've had a chance to check on Pegasus or the DuckDuckGo thing.
I am so not up to speed on the DuckDuckGo thing, but the Pegasus thing, I do have a little bit to add to the whole process of the tools that Andrew is talking about. The tool that goes through and looks for the markers that Andrew is talking about that would indicate there's a likelihood that you've been targeted with Pegasus. That's a whole command line thing, which I don't know if you talked about that yet. So it works on a backup of your iPhone, just like Andrew said. And Jim, you said you didn't think it could work on an encrypted backup, unless you unlock your encrypted backup. From what I understand, it will not work. So in essence, yes, you're doing this on an unencrypted version of your backup from your phone. And this is much easier to do on an iPhone than an Android phone, because there are so many security measures that Apple has put in place that the markers are much easier to identify. So if you run the same test on Android phone backups, there's a higher likelihood of false positives, because it's kind of it's kind of a Wild West diving into that operating system.
Okay. Yeah. Don't know. I mean, it just, again, frankly, Jeff is probably the one most likely here to be investigated by anybody that's using Pegasus. So he would be.
Yeah, I need to run that tonight, probably. Just saying.
Which you're a dissident from what group, Jeff? Now maybe
Yes.
We don't want to know. Yes. Okay, good. He's a dissident from all of them, folks. There you go. I like it.
I'm just a born rebel.
Like it.
I had one other thing on the list, and it's way down on the list, and I think it's interesting because I believe at least one person here is a Pocket Cast user. But this week, Pocket Cast was acquired by Automatic, the folks who publish WordPress. And I just thought this is really interesting that, now, because WordPress, Automatic acquired somebody else in the podcast space as well. Now they've acquired a podcast client. And I'm just curious if anybody has any thoughts on this, because we have a number of podcasters here.
I do.
Oh,
I know you weren't expecting me to first have an opinion or something to say. Total shock.
well, go for it. Go for it.
Okay.
Get us started.
So Automatic, they do WordPress hosting, and that it's not actually. Well, it is WordPress code, but they're actually doing their own hosting for the WordPress product, right? So they've picked up a couple of podcast related properties, and I think that their plan is to do for podcast hosting what they've been doing for the WordPress hosting community. So you'll have these tools that are available to you that you can use as a podcaster, just like you can with any of the other podcast hosting tools. And then they'll have the whole aggregator part of it as well, because now they own that. So you'll be able to get an all-in-one podcasting solution through WordPress, through Automatic, and it'll just be like click a button in your WordPress.com site, or if you're doing self-hosting, then there'll probably be a way to just add that in as a module too.
Jeff, how I don't quite understand that, because by that logic, why aren't they coming out with a browser?
Why would they need to come out with a browser?
Why would they need a podcasting client? How does having a podcasting client help them make podcast hosting tools?
Well, the other podcasting piece that they bought, if I'm remembering correctly, is related to hosting. Or did they just buy 2 clients? And I'm creating this
clients.
Just clients? Never mind. Disregard everything I just said. But even still, if they're picking up a couple clients, aggregator clients, my guess is that they have some way that they want to integrate those into WordPress.com and maybe ultimately become an aggregator themselves, just like Apple is doing through iTunes.
Our discussion of the Pegasus spyware continues in the next edition of MacVoices, and we take a look at the acquisition by Automatic, the makers of WordPress, of Pocket Casts, the podcast client software, and what it might mean for podcast production and consumption. And based on a request from the chat room, we all reveal what our podcast client software of choice is. That's next time on MacVoices. I hope you'll join us. Until then, and as always, I'm Chuck Joyner. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices, or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you MacVoices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.